when someone gives you a game and you have to make the game music, you have to be versatile. You really have to be learned in composing. Because like one day I might have to do a classical soundtrack, and then the other day I might have to do some electronic techno, and then I might have to do some really atmospheric yoga stuff. You never know, and if you don't really study that, you're gonna have that separation, and you can only go so far when it comes to composing.
I'm going to start out with a little story. So I was standing in a corridor of what was an old museum. To my left was a big white marble wall, and the hallway extended, maybe 20 feet wide, 20 meters in front of me and behind me. To my right was a big pane of windows, and I could see sunlight coming in from the afternoon. The little dots of dust in the old museum air were slowly meandering as I could see them. And then I heard it, thump, 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 and a pause. I turned behind me but didn't see anything. And then I heard it again, thump, 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 and a pause. Thump, thump, thump. It's closer. Thump, thump, thump. And I froze as a Tyrannosaurus Rex came around the corner. We had a moment, a fearful moment, when it looked directly at me, and then it charged full speed. I froze because I have watched Jurassic Park. And I know if you freeze, they can't see you. It was right in front of me. I had squatted down. The T-Rex leaned down as to inspect me, turned a little bit sideways before it stood up and emitted a huge roar, but like a scary roar. And I was petrified. It placed one trunk-like leg here and another one there, and slowly it walked over my squatted figure. I felt myself breathe out a sigh of relief as this terrible dinosaur continued down the hall and finally walked around the corner. Now, I know dinosaurs don't exist, and I know they've not existed for 65 million years, but at that moment, in that virtual reality experience, what I knew was not the same thing as what I felt. I felt scared, actually. I felt myself tensed up. I was breathing faster. My heart was in my throat. I had squatted down without even realizing it. And this, to me, illustrates the power of a new storytelling medium that is virtual reality. You see, for the history of storytelling, you've had to hear it. And in recent decades, you've been able to watch it. But thanks to what we have now, you're an agent in it. The story isn't in front of you, it's around you. And this is exciting for a multitude of reasons. I mean, imagine an immersive trailer for any of your favorite movies where you're in the middle of the action. Gaming, educational things, but one of the things that I'm really interested in is data visualization. Visualizing the complex. When a story unfolds around you, it affords you new dimensionalities of visualization. So I work in neuroscience, and we are on this quest to understand one of the arguably most complex things in the known universe. There's 80 billion neurons connected through 100 trillion some-odd synapses. The numbers are so big they will boggle your mind, ironically. But at any given moment, there's, any second in your brain, there's billions or trillions of synapses firing in order for you to understand and perceive the world around you. Thanks to what we know today, we're able to image down to the nanoscale. And in between the nanoscale, there's lots of different layers of activity that are coming together in a symphony of sorts to create your mind. So imagine if you took this new storytelling medium of virtual reality and applied it to neuroscience. You could see neuron branches extend outward and beyond. You could visualize the electrical impulses flowing through those cells. You could even imagine an experience where you trigger the cells. And that's not actually imagination, because for the past few months at Eyewire, we've been working on that. And we're releasing at Tribeca Film Festival on Monday an immersive virtual reality experience where you trigger the cells that allow a brain to visualize motion. Now, this kind of ironically stemmed from a side project within the company that I run, which is Eyewire. So we're trying to map the brain, but before you can visualize something, you have to know what the hell you're going to visualize. In the brain, most of it's uncharted territory. it's a sort of a catch-22 from today's modern era. You know, we can see deeper, closer, faster, but it generates these huge data sets that we cannot automatically analyze. Consequently, it takes us a really long time to do anything. So we turned our software into a game. And now we have hundreds of thousands of gamers from all over the world who solve these 3D puzzles. And as they solve these puzzles, fitting these little chunks together, they map out the branches and full cells so we can see the connections among neurons in the brain. And then we pair this structural data with functional data so that we can then model how information processing happens in the brain. It's a pretty cool project. And a side effect of it is that, well, because we have the general public as a necessary part of our scientific pipeline, we're obligated to share our science. Now, not just why we're doing what we're doing and what our discoveries are, but we've kind of taken it a step higher. You know, how can we share neuroscience with the world? How can we help people discover the wonder and the beauty of the brain? How can we spark curiosity in minds of people anywhere in the world? Because we need them to care enough to go to Eyewire and help us figure it out. You know, it's interesting that gamers are really proving to be an invaluable resource in the world of neuroscience. And when you think about it, how we are who we are, you know, how this cantaloupe-sized brain inside your head makes a thinking, feeling human mind. These questions have been rising in humans' minds ever since we were really able to call ourselves humans. And thankfully, we're so connected and we have such vast technology available at our fingertips that it seems feasible, and in fact, it's becoming fact, that in order to answer these questions, we're becoming reliant on a global, a species-wide collaboration to help us come up with the answers. And wouldn't it be something, almost the cherry on top, if the key to that puzzle were gamers? That's all. Thanks.
Stay there, stay there. Let's hear it one more time for Amy.
Thank you.
Jeez. I
wasn't
make
sure what to
stories
say.
on the radio. You know, related to that, I found myself sitting there listening to you talk, and in 7 short minutes feeling like you completely obliterated any relevance of what I do. But then I thought, well, I don't know. And anytime something is gained, something is lost. And I wonder about, is there, you talk about the difference between somebody tells you a story and you experience a story on television or in video in some form, and then this virtual reality experience. Obviously, your brain's doing different things, I would imagine. That's what you're learning when these 3 different kind of formats happen. Is there any downside to the virtual reality piece of things? The immersive thing is potentially something lost, or not?
Well, I mean, I guess there's downsides to anything, right? I mean, you run all sorts of risks with virtual reality. I mean, that people might just end up in a ball in their corner who never left VR, and they completely become absent from the world at large. But to be fair, I mean, if you look at New Yorker comics from the 1980s, they're about parents sitting around watching TV and missing their kids' first steps. So this has kind of always been a catch-22. And I think if I just thought about all the potential perils of VR, I would miss the opportunities. And to me, it's just an entirely new way to think about how we visualize anything. And it's not really, it's not the end of storytelling. It just opens up a new creative medium. In the same way that computers didn't put animators out of business, they just gave them a whole new toolkit from which they can, exercise their creativity. I think virtual reality and augmented reality just are another toolkit for storytellers to think about different ways to put people in the midst and put people in charge of driving those stories themselves.
As I listened to you talk, I kept thinking about the idea of a world of 7 billion plus people, the idea of crowdsourcing like you're talking about, tapping into all of that, the exponential rise in our ability to compute things. Your work talking about mapping the brain, understanding how information works and how the brain constructs what I'm hearing is consciousness. right? So
Yeah.
how much are you either driven by or grappling with the more sort of philosophical and existential thing of going like, can we get at what consciousness is, what experience is, like what being human is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I'm so glad you asked that because I'm 100% driven by understanding consciousness. I mean, that's why I am passionate and emblazoned about the brain. I don't see it as something that we can't understand, and I don't think understanding it takes anything away from it. I think it only adds to the beauty and the wonder of the world. And just because you can understand things doesn't mean you fathom them fully. To me, one of the things that, I started researching neuroscience before I, started running this brain mapping company, and I found that a lot of the more human level questions, like what happens when you have an idea, or what's going on in the brain when you're feeling curious, or what's the moment when like you've worked really hard to figure something out and finally it clicks in your brain. I would ask all these researchers these questions and they were like, oh, we don't know. We don't know. Like we can barely tell how a mammal can tell like that a hand is moving up. That's like where we are right now, okay? It's like we know a lot or we know very little depending on where you're coming from, and both of those perspectives are right. But I think if we really want to have these great leaps in neuroscience, what we need are people who have different perspectives coming in. So in our case, building a game, we don't just have a group of neuroscientists, working in their lab. We have designers, we have some of our people have backgrounds in linguistics, we have illustrators, we have really creative people coming together to work with really technical people, all working with gamers, with the general public, and consequently it creates this interesting kind of mishmash of interesting questions. And to me, it's like questions have really driven us as a species. They drive us forward because what we create is kind of driven from the questions that we ask and the actions that we take from those questions. And so to me, the more interesting questions that you can garner and the more really emblazoned and passionate people you can bring together towards a common purpose, which is in this case understanding the brain, the more unique approaches and potential, hurdle leaping, initiatives you can generate. So to me, this is another thing that really drives me, is this idea of crowdsourcing and getting science outside the lab, opening up so that you don't have to have this formal background, you just have to have some knowledge and some skill set and some passion that you bring to the table.
Amy Robinson-Sterling, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a composer-director. I do music and directing, and I'm here to talk about video game music. And before I came on stage, how many of you play games here? Casually? Hardcore? How many of you are cranking 70 hours in Dying Light like I just did, embarrassingly? So I wanted to figure out a way, how do I bring you into my world? What's the opening way I can bring you into kind of how I think about things? And it hit me yesterday. I was flicking through the radio channels and Taylor Swift came on. That song, 22. You know that song? I can't sing. Now, cool song, I have no problems with the song, but there is nothing about that song that I can relate to. Nothing. I'm 33 years old. I'm not 22. I've never been that happy in my life. I have lower back pains. There is nothing about that song that really clicks with me relating with it. And that's what I love about video game music. Let me get into it a little bit. When you're playing a game, you are having the same experience as everyone is sharing that same musical experience. Because when you're doing the music or you're listening, it's not about you, it's about the game. When you're Solid Snake, sneaking around corners, that music has to fit what you are doing. And that's one of the magic of game music. And what music, it can bring you into an experience like these other things just can't do. Some people can relate to the Taylor Swift song, other games can't. When I start designing a song, let's say it's an ice level, I need to somehow take ice and put it into music. How do you do that? And again, it's a challenge. You got to figure out what is gonna sound like ice? What types of twinkles and crystallization, and it's a big process. I got inspired when I played this game called Starcraft, came out in '98. Has anyone ever played Starcraft? Okay. There's 3 different races. There's human, the Zerg, they're an insect race in the Protoss. They're like almost like a spiritual robotic. And the composers did such an amazing job capturing each race. The humans had a metal, electronic, industrial feel. The Zerg, the insect race, had this weird sound effects, buzzy little things. And the Protoss, who were this very spiritual robotic race, had some really interesting pads and smooth. And that's when I really got interested. I actually took that game, this is kind of weird, and I took the volume off, I set up each bass, and I put on my keyboard, I went through 8,000 sounds, trying to kind of see what goes with what would work with this, what would work with that, because that's integral when it comes to composing. It's not just about music, it's not about, major chords or minor chords. You don't almost even think about that. You're only thinking about the experience of the game. So, how to learn the process? This is an interesting philosophy that I kind of have with any art. There's a balance of discipline with innovation. And I almost think that too much discipline can lack innovation. And here's what I mean by that. Yes, I'm disciplined. I learned music theory. You have to. It's important to learn. But the second you really start to be too disciplined in anything, you can lose the creativity form. I have other friends in other music, and they do cover songs, and they've spent so much time playing other people's music that they never really sat and figured out their own sound. And part of this, when you're composing these experiences, like I said, you're creating things that there's no rule book for. What's lava? How do you make music as lava? What if the level's purple? You need to convey purple with music. What does that even mean? Can you teach that? You know what I'm saying? Like, can you teach that? But there's a way to do it. There is a way to convey purple with music. There's a way to convey yellow with music. There's a way to convey gray. But it's about that self-experimentation, because I don't know that there's a way to teach that. So kind of the whole process of the creation, it's learned, but it's also just creating experimentation. This goes beyond music. Forget music. I think this goes with a lot of other arts. The second you start losing that dreamer quality, when you stop dreaming and imagining and trying to pioneer, that's when the new things stop. The last point I wanted to make with this, just because I wanted to end on a topic that's not just related to music, but anybody. Getting into this field was very difficult. It was really hard. I've been composing music since I was like 14 years old. I really started pursuing to make music for a game at 22, and I got my first opportunity at 28 years old. 8 years of pushing and fighting through. And the way I got into it, funny story, wasn't even music related. I got into video as well, which is I do directing alongside music. And I was doing a video for Intrepid Labs in Cambridge. Do you guys work out of there? Anyone work out of Intrepid Labs? It's like a shared spot for video game companies. And we were having lunch, and I was juggling in the break room. This is legit how I got my first job. I was juggling in the break room, and Alex Schwartz from Alchemy Labs started juggling with me. And we were just juggling balls together. That didn't come out right. We were just juggling, and we started talking, and then 6 months later, I was producing my first game. After 9 years, I sent out thousands of emails. I sent out care packages. I got one job offer in St. Petersburg, Russia. It's the only job offer I got. But at that point in life, I was not ready to make that move. But And I don't mean to sound cliche, but they really like when you want to do something, like you have to stay on it. You have to stay on it. Like 9 years to do one game, thousands of emails, and the last thing I want to leave is no matter what you're pursuing, video game music or anything, you really have to grind it out. Don't stop. Keep pushing. I don't care if it takes till you're 50 years old. Just keep pushing. Keep going after it, and it's never too late to start. You can start anytime. Don't have, I'm too old. No, you're not too old. You're not too young. Just get it done. My name is Jason Margaca. Thank you very much.
Jason Margaca! Who has a friend who is a fan of jazz? Who has a jazz person in their life? Or who is a jazz person in everybody else's life, right? You know how jazz people are? Like when they they really geek out on jazz.
Yeah.
And they're just like, man, the 1954 recording with Roy Eldridge on trumpet is like the definitive version. Like, is there geeking out about that in the video game composition world?
Yeah, it's terrible. When me and my friends like hang out, like you can play any song from Mega Man 2 through 6, and we can hum the whole thing. Like just humming the weirdest stuff, and people are like, "What are you guys doing?" But that's it, because there's a different musicality to it.
Yeah.
There's no rules. There's no the verse has to be 8 and the chorus has to be 4 bars. You just go. Yeah. And it's and with video game music, there's such variation. There's no, like I said, there's no rules. It's like you can have 3 bars going into 7 bars, and especially when you're really into music and you study music, it creates a different level of appreciation for the brilliance that goes into composing a piece of that complexity.
So are there dividing lines? Like I think about, almost any kind of music that hangs around for a period of time and develops over time. You start to have these dividing lines, right? Like the guys who, played jazz in the swing era, when bop rolled around, some of them went with it, and some of them said, well, that's not jazz, I don't know what that is. And then the bop people, when free jazz came around, said, well, that's not jazz, I don't know what that is. Same thing with rock and roll, same thing with hip hop. Are there dividing lines in like video game music where people are like old school, middle school, new school?
Well, yeah, there is, and especially with game music, like you can have people who like quote unquote make beats. But the thing is, to make beats, I was making rap beats in a year. When someone gives you a game, and you have to make the game music, you have to be versatile. You really have to be learned in composing. Because like one day I might have to do a classical soundtrack, and then the other day I might have to do some electronic techno, and then I might have to do some really atmospheric yoga stuff. You never know, and if you don't really study that, you're gonna have that separation, and you can only go so far when it comes to composing music. So there definitely is a separation with how hard you work, how much time that you put into it, and what you can and can't do.
Do you feel long-suffering? Are you like people when people talk about games and like what's great about a game? Are you like, they're not saying the music?
No, because you know what, the music is sometimes just, it's not supposed to be the focal point. Yeah. It's supposed to be, it's invisible. If you took it out, you would notice it.
Sure.
Candy Crush, like that song I've sunk in so many hours into that game, and like the song never gets old, but it's almost not there. I mean, I've played it, like it never changes, but it doesn't get old, and why is that? I think it's just because it's not the focal point of what you're doing. You're playing a game. The music is there to complement that, so it works.
All right, before I let you go, your opinion, one man's opinion.
Go ahead.
Greatest video game music moment of all time. Huge. I just dropped a bomb.
The one thing, my last quick point, just to your question.
Sure.
I love in life when music is attached to something. Everyone in here has a song that's attached to something. That crazy college party, an awesome date you had, something, that moment. And that's what I think is so special about video game music. It's always attached to an incredible moment. And as far as my favorite video game moment musically, I would probably say the Final Fantasy VII battle theme song.
Oh, nice.
Just because I sunk in 100 hours into that game. Over 100 hours when I was 16.
Can you hum us a couple bars?
But that song,
Yeah.
the whole 100 hours, got me excited the first battle as in the last battle. That song always got me excited, and to be able to accomplish that, I think is a feat, and the composers of that game did an incredible job. So,
Jason Margaca.
thanks, guys.
So I'm going to take the next 8 minutes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of storytelling, or what I see as the future of storytelling. And I'm going to start by giving you an imaginary situation in which I give you all a brand new car. All right. So you all just got an imaginary brand new car, but there's a catch. This imaginary brand new car, it happens to be a 1909 Model T. Yay! Yeah, all right. It's a good car, right? Okay, so I'm gonna need your help. Describe to me what this Model T looks like. Okay, it's black. All right, tell me a little bit more about your Model T that you're about to get. All right, it's got some running boards, 4 wheels, fenders. Tell me a little bit more about those 4 wheels. Big, slick, thick, spokes, skinny, good in mud. No, what happens in mud? It spins, it gets stuck, it gets absolutely stuck. How do you start this brand new car? Crank it, right? And how about your roof? What does your roof look like? Kind of made of canvas? Does it have sort of that roll guard or anything? No, it's kind of a death trap. It's kind of a death trap. In fact, you guys, I'm really sorry, because the fact is that I've given you a terrible car. A Model T 1909 is a terrible car. But what it is a fairly good carriage, because it's 1909. And in fact, what did they used to call the first models of cars? A horseless carriage. And so they created these cars that in fact looked nothing like cars and everything like carriages, which in the long run were pretty bad cars. So let's fast forward maybe 100 years, and now we have similar technologies that are similarly changing our world completely and are similarly in their infancy, but we don't always think about that. When was the first iPhone released? 2007. When was the first Android released? 2008. Oh, you guys are good. Even my husband wasn't so sure about the Android. But yeah, 2007, 2008 are really when the first iPhone, Android models came out. Now, there were other smartphone devices back in the late 90s, but iPhone, Android, those are really the Model Ts of smartphones, essentially, right? The Model T was the first car that really brought it to the masses, and it stopped being this crazy thing that rich people did and started being the thing that everybody did. So in fact, Model T 1909, the first patent for a diesel engine was in 1885. That technology was already 35 years old, right? And so now, an iPhone, I mean, has that been around for 35 years? Not really, right? So we are in the very infancy of this technology. And what's happening is exactly what happened back then, where we're trying to shoehorn the old technology on top of the new technology. And so my favorite thing that was ever released was when The Onion came out with their mobile app, and they said, "It's The Onion, now smaller and harder to read." Which is true, because that's what we're doing. We're taking technology that we're accustomed to, which is either a computer or maybe a book, and we're saying, great, let's make this small. So we're not really using a lot of the benefits of the actual technology that we have. Even internet games, how many people were playing internet games when they were in, say, elementary school? Some. How many people were playing when they were in high school? All right, so we got a young crowd here. But even the internet games world is still in its infancy. And so I want to talk a little bit about the different types of games that we can have that uses this technology rather than just shoehorns old types of technology onto these new devices. Has anybody ever heard of Ingress before? Yeah, man. Ingress is a great game. So Ingress is a game that uses location, and you run around, and you're using your device to interact with the real world. And it was initially created by Google, and then sort of Niantic Labs created their own thing, but that is sort of the infancy of getting these devices to stop being Game Boys and start being something that interacts with the real world. And there's a lot of examples of these types of games, especially my museums crew are over there. Yeah, museumies! So museums and libraries, you would be shocked to believe it, but it's true. Museums and libraries are really a standard bearer for these types of location-based games where the real world has to interact with a digital component some way. And so we're coming out with games like Tate Trumps. It's this incredible game at the Tate Modern Art Museum in London, and you had to go around and find all of these different types of paintings, and you had to pit them against each other. Murder at the Met was a game that my company built where it was really similar to Clue, when you sort of ran around the American galleries and you had to figure out who the murderer was. These are games that connect real spaces and digital elements. But there's a caveat. And I learned this when I was working at a company called Scavenger. It's a wonderful, wonderful company, and it was in the heady days of 2011 where we believed that location was going to change everything and that everybody was just out in the real world waiting to play our games. Does anybody remember Foursquare? Kinda. Kinda, right? Because what we found was that when people are out in the real world, they're actually busy, right? It's a true story. So we really thought, we were like, awesome. Everybody's going to go to the cafe, and they're sitting at the cafe, and they're like, what do I do? I'll play a game. But that's not quite what happened. They were at the cafe. They were busy. They were doing work. They had friends. And so something else had to happen, and that is giving people permission to play and giving people a space to play. And that's where creating environments has started to move storytelling. And so we're seeing it coming from two different directions. On one side, we're seeing these incredible things happen with VR and AR, like we just heard about, where you immerse yourself in this environment. On the other side, we're seeing things like immersive theater and escape rooms where you are immersed in the environment as well. Because people want to interact with environments. You don't go to a baseball game and sit there and stare at everybody. No, you cheer on your team. You want to affect the outcome. Even if you think you may not be able to affect the outcome, it's still a human instinct to try and interact with things. It's the same reason why we scream at horror movies. Don't go in there, don't go in there. They're not listening, but we'll still do it. And so I believe the future of storytelling is allowing people to respond to this natural impulse to be part of the story. No longer do you have to be the audience, sitting there, staring at somebody like me, telling you things. Sorry, guys, this should have been interactive. But moving forward, we will have to be brave enough to include people in our stories, because when you include people in your stories, you are no longer in control as an artist. You can only create the environment, and people will interact with it as they will. So it takes a little bit of courage to create new art. But this is the way I believe that storytelling is going, and we have to be brave to just sort of grab it and move forward with it. So that's all I have.
All right, Kellian. You know, you're the second speaker, maybe the third, to really use the word storytelling a lot, which I find fascinating because, again, you know, I'm in a business where we talk about storytelling a lot too, but we don't think of it in terms of games at all. Are games a type of storytelling, or do games is it a good game has to tell a story? What's the intersection of like sort of what we might think of as a game? Because I think it's something like, I don't know, like is there a story to checkers? No. Is that a game? Yes. But the games you're talking about are like, there's stories in them. Where is that cross-section?
Sure. I think a lot of it has to do with what your goals are for the games. And I say that every single time anybody puts pen to paper, do not build it if you don't know why. You really need to know how you want your user to interact with this game. And especially with education games and games for nonprofits, these are organizations that do not have huge budgets. So if you don't know what you want, like right at the very beginning, then it's difficult. But the fact is that stories are a very human way to interact with content. And it's much easier to remember something when it's seated in a story. So I would say that most good games are storytelling.
I got it. What's the advantage of telling a story through a game versus maybe some other method?
I guess you could say that it's similar to when you're teaching, right? And I mean, who went through that sort of teaching environment where you just sat there and stared at a teacher, right? Was anybody? Come on, who was part of those classrooms, right?
And
there we go, where you just sat there and somebody talked at you. However, like every educator will say that when you're involved in the content and you have agency in the content and you affect the outcome of the content, then you own it, you remember it, it's yours. And that's how I think that games have the power to teach.
You know, one of the things I'm interested in is the idea of, you know, when a game is participatory or, you know, when it's that kind of storytelling you're talking about, the more immersive it gets, in some ways the closer to real life it gets, right? And you know, you say you work in a lot of educational and like museum environments. I think that some kids are very good at participating naturally, jumping into something, whether it be like a group of kids or just kind of hanging out or whatever. Like, are there different degrees of how easy it is for a kid to kind of come to a game and embrace it and say, "Oh, this is fun and cool"? Like, do you see differences?
Yes, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And in fact, same thing for grown-ups, same thing for anybody.
Yeah.
Any sort of media that you create, you want there to be different levels of engagement. In fact, we were just talking about this, about ARGs versus, say, a video game.
And an ARG is?
An alternate reality game. Or actually, we were talking more about LARPs, like live-action role-play games.
There it is.
LARPs, they're so great. But I personally have never been able to really engage with LARPs because there's so many rules, and I'm not very good at so many rules. So it's important as game designers to be able to create different levels of entry because people will have different barriers to entries. So depending on who you want, it's all about your audience, right? I mean, if you only want certain types of people, great, you know, create this game that only certain people will be attracted to. But if you want something that's more broadly appealing to people, then you have to create different levels of entry so that people can participate in their own way.
Kellian, Adam, Pletcher. Thank you.
My name's Ethan. I'll be your dungeon master. I want you to picture in your mind's eye the best version of yourself, sort of the Uber version of yourself. You know, if you'd lived in sort of a swords and sorcery realm, so maybe you're a human or an elf or a dwarf or a unicorn that farts rainbows. You're, you know, a paladin, a fighter, you're a magic user, wizard, okay? You're a thief, or whatever it is you want to be, okay? Above all, you are a swarthy adventurer, and you have heard in the little town that you live in. The mayor comes up to you and she says, "My son has been captured and been taken away," and it turns out, yes, her son has last been seen up at Blarg Castle. Now, Blarg Castle is a place far away. It takes a few days to get there. Cool castle, kind of a little run down. In fact, it's in ruins, and it's haunted, and there may or may not be catacombs beneath the castle that may or may not be full of awesome treasure, but there's probably also, yeah, you guessed it, a mad wizard who may be there, he may be dead, he may be alive. Might just be the ghost of him. So the mayor says to you, you know, you can go if you're up for this adventure. You are entitled to every piece of treasure you can take back with you as long as you get my son, okay? That is your quest. Do you go? Do you go? All right. So you're carrying whatever you brought with you, which you can decide what it is. You travel for several days. You get to see the castle up there in the hill. You walk through the forest to get there, right? You come to the top of the hill. Silhouetted against the sky is this castle fallen down. And you see the entrance to the castle, which has been, you know, a little bit crumbled. Sort of a little house there that's crumbled. And sitting in front of the entranceway is this large creature. It's probably a troll. You're not really sure what it is. And you see what looks to be a coiled chain, a big, massive coil of chain at its feet, okay? And it appears that you have seen it before it has seen you. What do you do? What's that? Sneak by it. All right, you want to try? You want to roll? All right, here, you ready? All right, roll. What do you get? Roll it right down the middle here. You guys watching his rolls? Because this guy might be... Yeah, down the middle. Let's just sit in the open here. Uh-oh. And he gets a... Oh, it looked like a 20. It's a 2. All right, unfortunately, you go up to the troll and you... Or whatever it is, and you stumble and you trip over yourself, and the troll looks at you, and you can tell now that the troll is actually attached to the chain as he moves over, and he says, "Who's there, friend or foe?" What do? Run! Run! Or you say friend. Oh, okay, interesting. All right. You say friend. Friend? Friend help? Friend. Key. Where's the key? Okay. What's the experience? I want to keep this scenario in the back of your mind. We're going to pause the story for a second. Think about that experience. A lot of the speakers tonight have talked about story and storytelling, and I guess I'm sort of the grumpy old man of the crew here. It's not that I haven't played video games. It is not that I don't love video games. Don't really have time for video games, but I come from a slightly different era. If you can imagine another world before the internet, before personal computers, deep in the Carter administration, at the cusp of the Reagan administration. I played a lot of board games, as many of the board games we've talked about tonight, Monopoly and Stratego, Clue. And then in 1974, this game came along called Dungeons & Dragons. And anyone, maybe you've heard of it before. All right, most of you have. You guys are all nerds. I know you've heard of it. And I know that you sort of, maybe if you play or didn't play, you sort of know it has some role has a role to play in the history of gaming. And I think, we're at a very interesting time right now because we have these experiences. We have many, many possibilities for kinds of gaming or real or virtual experiences that we can have. And I really feel like D&D was the original virtual reality generating game or machine. And by that I mean is that all these games that had preceded D&D up until this point, had lots of rules and were very complicated and had all kinds of ways in which you might sort of get really into the game. But let's just face it, when you're playing Monopoly, you don't really have the opportunity. I mean, you're sort of playing the role of a Trump-like real estate, magnate who wants to crush his opponents and hear the lamentations of their stockbrokers or whatever. But you don't really, there's not really a character to play, and weirdly, the character you play is actually a top hat, which makes absolutely no sense, or a little Scotty dog, or a little wheelbarrow, or a thimble, like what the hell, right? But imagine a game where you get to be that top hat, and you get to, in your minds anyway, not just like buy Park Place and Boardwalk, but like there's secret catacombs and haunted dungeons beneath Park Place and Boardwalk, and you get to go into them. I mean, that is the space, or that is the sort of imaginative game-playing space that Dungeons & Dragons created. It was the first game where you could create this world jointly around a table with you and your friends. You could have this kind of shared communal storytelling experience. And it's not that kids don't have storytelling experiences, but here was this odd thing where you create this world and a set of rules where that storytelling can take place. There's nothing worse than playing cops and robbers with your kids, and suddenly the kid's like, well, that's not a machine gun, that's a laser. And you're like, well, you can't do that. I'm like, well, yes, you can, but D&D has rules, and we all know the push and pull of rules, right? But think about that scenario that I began with, this notion of role-playing. You are in that environment, and many of the speakers have talked about virtual reality kinds of games, or where you sort of looking at an image, and it's the image that allows you to immerse into the experience because it's so lifelike, right? But I guess this is where the grumpy old man in me comes out, this notion of the power of just the imagination, right? If you're given a structure for play that gives you that opportunity, the ability of what I would ultimately say, is a portal for creative problem solving, imagination, role-playing, testing moral limits. Think of that troll at the beginning, right? Are you going to torture the troll to get the information you need? Are you going to make friends with the troll? Are you going to kill the troll? Are you going to run away from the troll? Okay? So all of these ideas kind of expanding into this new world of gaming, which if you do play video games, I know many of you do, the mechanics of this game, are the root of all of these. The mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons are at the sort of root of a lot of the games that we have today. And I think what we're having, as much as I love my computer and I love this device, and it makes my world easier and my life easier, I think what we're experiencing now in this moment is a kind of, I wouldn't call it a backlash, but a kind of desire for a face-to-face real experience. And we're seeing it with board games, the board game renaissance. We're seeing it with LARPing. We're seeing it with escape rooms. We're seeing it with places like Bodeborg, if you've been to Bodeborg up in Malden, okay? This idea that the power of the imagination and the ability, to have what feels like a fulfilling, real storytelling experience that's not just simply something you have to look at, but something that you bring your imagination to. So that's my sort of grumpy old man take on games. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, our token grumpy old man, Ethan Gilsdorf. Games as a way to bond. I mean, it sounds like that's kind of something you're talking about here.
Definitely.
Why?
Because, well, I think from my own individual personal experience as a shy kid growing up in a scary world of people who seemed like they were going to kill me at any moment, the traditional ways in which I would be bonding with at least in American society, with my male friends, it's a pretty limited amount of things you can do. And I was not a sports guy, I was not a jock. So I was looking for some other opportunity for experiencing something communally where we do something together and we participate in something together that is a kind of group sense of achievement, a group sense of belonging, okay? There's also this weirdness about a game like D&D. This is not limited to D&D in any means of the imagination, but this notion of having your own crew of people who understand your language, your sort of private language of specialized information, which can be very powerful, right? That sense of belonging, that you know something that other people don't know.
Do you, I wonder about, specifically that, like the idea of, I mean, I think you're talking about how what you did, Dungeons and Dragons, has sort of laid groundwork for something that's way more popular than Dungeons and Dragons ever was.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
And part of the appeal for you in Dungeons and Dragons is that it was a little bit of a close circle, a little bit of a self-selected group, people like you.
Right.
Now it's kind of unleashed on the whole wide world.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, humans are humans, so the same things, if repackaged a little bit, that attracted you to it and that small group are probably attracting a wider audience. But are you protective of it at all? Do you look at what it's sort of wrought, like a lot of people who sort of start in a small underground scene of some sort,
and then they get
see
upset.
it explode, and then get like, well, you guys are posers.
Right,
posers
exactly.
out there.
Right, we were the original people who were
you weren't
kind of
there at the start.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, I think that's a legitimate thing for subcultures, which is something I write about in my book, is that you have a sort of shared identity that's around kind of being different or having a kind of opposition to what other people are doing. To my mind, the more people that play this game, more games like it, the better. And I do think that it doesn't really matter whether you know that you're playing D&D or not. You kind of are in many ways. Yeah. When you're posting something on Facebook, when you're being clever on Twitter, you are in a way kind of doing a kind of socially acceptable, dumbed down version of role playing. You're kind of doing a version of yourself that feels a dating profile at Match.com or OkCupid or whatever. In a way, it's a kind of role playing.
Right.
And so I don't have any intrinsic data on this, but I do feel like a lot of the early experiments in role-playing, which came out of LARPing and the Society for Creative Anachronism and theater and people taking psychedelic drugs and all kinds of things coming out of the 60s and 70s gave birth to this notion that, we don't have to just be ourselves. We can be someone else, and we can learn about ourselves that way.
Where, if somebody here, or I mean, maybe if they're not even here, because we got a fairly kind of friendly audience here who understands what we're talking about. Where does somebody go if the stuff you're talking about, like the idea of like board games are coming back and intricate card games and Dungeons and Dragons. If I am not in that world and I'm kind of interested in that world, I'm like, maybe I've come to it at a later age. I'm like, that sounds kind of cool. I want to try it now. Where do you go? Where do you find that?
Well, the amazing thing about this is you can certainly buy the products. I mean, because of the internet and because of Amazon and online retailers, the products are much more accessible than they ever were at any time. Certainly, when I was a kid, But I think that, and this goes to the stereotypes of I think geek in your culture, the idea that you go to a place like Pandemonium Books and Games in Central Square and like go into literally into the dungeon of that place and interact with those people who play those games.
Right.
It's not as awful as it seems, but I think that it seems like I think the perception is somehow that you have to go to a place where people do this and you can be part of that. You just need to get together. It doesn't have to be D&D. I mean, tons of people casually play Settlers of Catan or Ticket to Ride or King of Tokyo. These are games that are based on these same ideas. They're not as I'm forgetting who it was. Our fellow panelist over there was talking about how some games felt like they had so many rules that the bar to entry was
Kellian.
so high. Kellian. Sorry. So you can. Not all games are that way. I mean, there's really people who are like really care really strongly about this stuff and they want to protect it, or they have a high bar to entry. And other kinds of games, I've seen people at some gaming stores with the game is just sitting around and telling a story. That's all you do. People just take turns telling a story. You might roll a dice every so often just to decide who gets to tell the next part of the story. It can be very, very simple group storytelling experience. It doesn't have to be this complicated thing where you have to have 35, rule books to enter that game.
And a 75-sided die.
And a 75-sided die, exactly.
Ethan Gilsdorf.
Thank you.
All right. How we doing, guys? How about our speakers, right? Really good. Really good. How about our audience, you guys? Really good. Really good. My goodness gracious. So in a second, I'm going to kind of ask you guys if there's stuff on your mind that you want to hear. We don't have too much longer left, so I won't be able to get to everybody's questions. But I actually want to start out. I'm going to throw this out there because we were upstairs. When we do these things, before we come down here, the speakers and I get together for a couple minutes before we come down just to get to know each other, talk through what we're going to do and stuff. And there was I was a little late today because I was working on a story, and I get in, and there's like this insane discussion going on about escape rooms amongst all of these folks. And they were really into it. So, show of hands, how many people understand, know, and or have done an escape room, know what that is? All right. So, less than half, I would say. So I want you guys to talk about this escape room thing, what it is, what the phenomenon is, why you like it, what catches your eye about it. I'm just going to throw it out to all of you. I'm going to hand you guys the mics. Go.
Kellian, start. All right. I will start, but Ethan just worked on a story for this, so I'll pass it over to him after. Okay, but I am obsessed with escape rooms because they are such good games, and it's exactly what I was talking about. With this interacting with an environment. And so you go into a room and you have an hour and you have to get out of this room over the course of the next 60 minutes. And there's puzzles and riddles and all sorts of things that you have to unlock, and they all have different themes. They all tell stories. Well, not all of them tell stories, but the good ones tell stories. Sometimes you can play some sort of a character, and then after 60 minutes, either you crack the code and you get out of the room, or you do not crack the code and they make fun of you. Yeah, they don't kill you or lock you in the room. They just mock you.
Well, I would just add that they have what's great about escape rooms and some of these other what's being called reality gaming is there's no. I was talking about bar to entry. I mean, there's really no right or wrong way to do them, and I just think it's a great. If you want to do a fun game that is just more than just sitting around a table or playing a video game where you are doing stuff in the real world, you can bring your nephews, you can bring your children, you can bring your grandparents. They have a kind of no one's an expert at them, so everyone is either equally good or bad at them, and everyone brings different ideas and different perspectives to them. So I think that's a really great kind of inclusive activity where, honestly, I think we are looking for things to do with each other and not just go to the bar, and you can do that with your friends, but maybe not with your nephews, depending on how old they are, at least my nephews. So, yeah.
I have a theory on that, which I think is really interesting, right? Okay, so the concept of bars are all about dulling senses, right? So you go into a bar where it's extremely dark and the music is extremely loud, and there's lots of people around, so you can't really feel or see or smell much of anything. And that is the environment in which we often have to interact with other humans. And in fact, it's very difficult to interact, but I guess the idea is that everybody else's bar is also lowered. So hopefully it's going to be easier because nobody can hear or see or smell. But it's really not a very good model, especially for females, and especially for smaller females. So when there are other ways for people to interact with each other in public environments where they have a series of rules that they can follow and steps that they can go through, then really creative interactions happen with people.
I would just add that when I did the story for the Globe about escape rooms, they said that people will come in at the end of the night and do that last gaming slot at like 11 o'clock who had one too many of these, and they don't do well. So drinking in escape rooms it does not improve your performance.
Do you guys have any thoughts on?
I'll just add a quick point. Just from my end with the escape rooms and all this, it's amazing the new experience you can create. And one thing that they should add to escape rooms, there's an art place in Lexington. Anyone know the name of it? It's like it's an art museum. People come and do installations. And this woman came, I forget, De Cordova. Okay. The place is. Do you work there? That place is awesome. This one woman came in. You'll know who I'm talking about. She did an installation. And one of her installations was the craziest thing I've ever experienced. It was a speaker up in the ceiling. And there was only one spot in the room. If you stepped in that spot, you heard someone whispering in your ear. Julian Schwartz, that was it, in this one spot. In the whole time, when they were talking, I'm like, something like that would be such an amazing experience. And you could add that as a puzzle in an escape room, like in the air, and you gotta tuck into a corner, because there was only one spot that hit. And so it's just amazing how all this new technology, new techniques can really, whether it's audio, obviously I talked about audio, but it's amazing all these new techniques can create all these different experiences in all types of mediums.
Yeah, I just will add one tiny thing. I've only been in one escape room, and it wasn't really an escape room. I learned that there's actually real ones, when we were talking. But it was a virtual one. It's gonna sound like I'm obsessed with VR. But it just happened.
Of course, it was virtual.
It was with this group called The Void out of Utah, and they take arenas and they build up styrofoam walls and they map out the arenas, and so you are walking through what looks to be like an Indiana Jones temple, and you're with a friend who looks like an Indiana Jones, random Indiana Jones person, and you have to work together to pick up these props, but they're virtual props, but they're real things that you can grab, and then you solve the puzzle and a portal appears, and then you walk through the wall, and then suddenly you're out looking some crazy jungle thing, and then a sea serpent pops up. So there's that possibility of escape rooms in the future too.
Cool. No, that's cool. All right, we have a few minutes left. I actually want to open it up to you guys. Does anybody have burning questions for the panel or for anybody in particular that they've been dying to ask?
I'm very impressed and blown away with what you guys do and how much you know. So I'll preface this question with that. When I think of video games, I think of when I started college and how much time I was wasting playing them. And I just kind of want to try to understand where the line is between wasting time playing video games and then where value's added.
Great question. Who wants to jump in?
I can jump in specifically because we're trying to value add by crowdsourcing neuroscience through a video game. And to us, one thing that I would consider a success from Eyewire, or the projects that are inspired by Eyewire, folded these other citizen science games, is that I would love to see, one of the top 10 games in the App Store be a citizen science game, where when you play the game, you're actually doing something good. And you don't even have to care about the thing that you're helping, as long as the game is fun enough. And it doesn't seem beyond possibility. In fact, I would probably bet that it will happen. It's only a matter of time. So if you think about it, when you're doing a game, you're just doing like the same thing over and over again. You just have different skins and different interfaces over it. That's exactly what science is, the same thing over and over again. They just don't have the game designers to create the interfaces and the interactions that make it a fun, rewarding experience. So to me, that's one element I would add.
As long as you're making money and putting food on the table, I mean, you're not doing too much. That's a tough, look, it's balance. It's a balance. I run a business. I play games. You just gotta balance it. I was watching this real quick, this YouTube video of, it was a top 10 people who died playing video games. This is real. Go look at when you get home. Go watch it. And so that's obviously too much, but I mean, like I said, it's.
Maybe not. They died happy.
Maybe, but this dude, he got dehydrated in a South Korean cafe. Anyways, doesn't matter. Look it up. I would just say, just in general, balance is important, and as long as it's not dominating your life, just play enough games, handle your business. I play 20 hours a week. It's like 3 hours a night. I kind of handle, I don't know if I did the math right, but.
No, I'm sure it was. I was just saying.
That is my recommendation.
I just want to say real quick, some people have bad breaks, and they have bad breaks for all sorts of things, right? It's not just games. And so I feel like that's somewhere that technology at some point will start to step in and be like, hey, person who's playing games, if you realize you have bad breaks, why don't we set a timer for the amount of time that you can play this game before we ping you and say, get off of this. I don't know why we don't have those things right now, but I think we will probably within the next 10 years or so. It's crazy that it doesn't exist yet.
There's rules, there's laws in South Korea. You can't play after midnight if you're under 18.
And just real quick,
There's laws in South Korea, I know, because we've launched in South Korea, and if you're under 18, you can't play after midnight.
Because the kids
Because they die, yeah.
And just real quick, I heard someone, 3 hours a night, I don't play that much. That's way too much. I heard somebody be like, 3 hours a night? Is this dude for real? I don't know who said that. I play if I can, but like I said, I do a lot of other stuff. But just.
Are you guys on Facebook a day? Facebook is.
Yeah, but in games is more involving.
That's true. But Facebook is a game. You get a score for Facebook. You get likes. And there's a leaderboard.
Yeah, you're right.
It's just your news feed. It's disguised.
It's like a game of egos, Facebook. I wonder how many likes I got for my
School is also.
WGBH. Yes.
You won Facebook today. Nicely done. Any final question? I can only take one more question. You got one? All right. What do you got?
It's kind of for Eyewire. Hello. So there's a lot of action adventure games now. So most popular one recently is Until Dawn. So I'm really curious how you study or anyone else considers the choices players make when they're playing and how that goes into storytelling or science.
Yeah, so right now it's barely a game. I mean, it's a game, but it doesn't really have a narrative. In fact, we do these little team versus competitions, and we do these big week-long competitions. One of them is launching next week, the space dinosaurs, and the narrative is that 65 million years ago. It's unrelated to my presentation. The dinosaurs didn't actually die when there was a meteorite. They went to Pluto, and they've become master engineers, and they're coming back to help save humans. So we have all these game masters that write these little narratives for tiny competitions within the game because we don't have an overarching game narrative. So we're really inspired by it. It's more that we're hindered by development time than we are by the ambition and desire to turn it into a more proper game. Hopefully that answers.
Just to her point, but I think it's definitely it's the time when I think people are getting more conscious, they're getting healthier, people want to eat better. They want to learn more. And I think that the time of more factual gameplay based is going to start happening. Movies are coming out. What was that science movie that just came out when Neil deGrasse Tyson went on Twitter and said, "I approve this movie." Like the movie
Gravity?
actually
The Martian?
was based in a level, The Martian, a level of science. Oh yeah, he did The Martian, and he also did the movie with the dude, Interstellar. I was gonna say the
He
dude
made
all
a
the girls like.
cameo in a recent movie.
But I think that time is coming because I mean, there's movies that you've like prominent scientists being like, I approve of that. So I definitely think that time is gonna start happening in video games. Is gonna start happening too.
Yeah, well, and you have like EVE Online has just launched this thing called Project Discovery, where it's a citizen science game within EVE. So 20,000 people a day, something play EVE, and now they can go in and they can help these researchers of the Human Genome Project like map out proteins. Yeah, and it's got an EVE interface, and it's got an EVE backstory, and it's produced by EVE, and this is the kind of thing that I hope to see in games coming forward. It's a hard challenge to do a citizen science game, to do a game that has a purpose for science, but I don't think that it's impossible.
Cool. Last final thoughts, you guys, and just send the mic down the way. Desert Island, you're alone or you're with people, doesn't really matter. You can bring one game with you. This could be anything from a pinochle deck to a board game to some sort of video game unit with one game in it. One game, what do you got? One game, that's it. Yeah. As many as you need to play. If you need 20 players, you have 20 people with you. Otherwise, everybody picks solitaire, right? You're like, solitaire. I'm alone, solitaire. But one game, what would you bring?
Go.
You could probably play Go. Oh, you gotta think about it? Okay. All right, I'm thinking about the whole, Desert Island thing. I think I'd bring a deck of cards because there's a million games you can play with cards.
Yeah.
Does this island have Wi-Fi? We have Wi-Fi? I would just one of my go-to just simple games that I just play all the time is this game on the iPhone called OLO, O-L-O, and you fling these little pucks and you play your friends online and you gotta land in their zone, and it's been 2 years and I still play it. So, yeah, it's like shuffleboard, but you bounce off walls, and if you get... Anyways, download the game. I'm J Mega, I don't know, find out from me and let's totally play.
I'm going to say deck of cards. Yeah. That sounds real. I've always wanted to learn how to play, really learn how to play chess. So maybe chess would be the thing.
Yeah. That's good. Cool. Let's hear it one more time for all of our speakers. Ethan, Jason, Amy, and Kellian.
Learning to be a candidate is actually its own special thing. It's not running a campaign, and it's not learning to be a decent public speaker. It's actually, there's actually a way to learn to be a candidate.